had been a tragedy analyst for the Galactic Council for over 300 cycles. His job was simple in theory but heavy in practice. He studied how different species responded to disasters. When a plague struck a world, when a star went unstable, when wars broke out, he and his team tracked what happened next. The data helped the Council decide which civilizations to save and which were already lost. His species, had avoided major catastrophes for thousands of years through careful planning and risk avoidance. They built their cities underground to avoid meteor strikes. They maintained small, scattered populations to prevent plague spread. They had never fought a war because they had perfected the art of negotiation before conflicts could start. They saw catastrophe as a failure of planning, and they were very good at planning. That morning, arrived at his workstation to find an alert flashing on his screen. The automated analysis system had flagged a file for review. The classification read, "Statistical impossibility, manual verification required." He opened the file. The species designation was humans from a planet called Earth in a relatively isolated arm of the galaxy. Had heard of them but never paid much attention. They were a young species, not yet part of the Council, and their region of space was considered low priority for observation. The first thing noticed was the sheer number of extinction-level events in their history. He counted them twice because he thought he had made an error. Supervolcano eruptions that blocked out their sun for years, ice ages that covered most of their landmass, a plague in their 14th century that killed one-third of an entire continent's population, 2 global wars in the span of 30 years that killed over 100 million of them, multiple near misses with nuclear weapons that could have turned their planet into a radioactive wasteland. According to every model the Council had developed over millions of years, humans should be extinct. At minimum, they should have collapsed back to primitive tribal groups after the first or second major catastrophe. That was the pattern. Species either went extinct or regressed so far that they had to rebuild from almost nothing, usually taking thousands of years to recover. But humans had done neither. After the plague that killed a third of Europe, they had entered something they called the Renaissance. Art, science, and exploration exploded across their civilizations. After their 2 world wars, they had created nuclear power, computers, and space travel. After each economic collapse, they had restructured their systems and built them stronger. The population graph showed exponential growth interrupted by sharp dips, but after each dip, the line shot upward even faster than before. Ran the data through 3 different analysis programs. All of them returned the same conclusion: error in data collection. The pattern was impossible. He spent the next week verifying the information. He contacted other species who had observation posts near Earth. He reviewed satellite footage and historical records. He even accessed the archives of the long-extinct predecessors, who had been watching the galaxy long before the Council existed. Every source confirmed the same pattern. Humans survived everything. More than that, they seemed to grow stronger after each disaster. Brought his findings to his supervisor, an ancient being called who had been analyzing civilizations since before species had discovered fire. "The data must be corrupted," said, reviewing the report with 3 of her eye stalks while the 4th watched. "No species behaves this way. Catastrophe breaks civilizations. It does not strengthen them." "That is what every model tells us," agreed. "But I have the data 17 times. I have cross-referenced with 4 independent observation networks. The pattern is real." Was quiet for a long moment. If this is accurate, it challenges everything we understand about development. The Council bases its rescue protocols on predictive models. If those models are wrong about humans, what else are they wrong about? "I would like permission to conduct direct observation," said. "I want to understand the mechanism behind this resilience." Made a gesture that in her species meant reluctant agreement. "I will present this to the Council, but be careful. Species that do not follow predictable patterns are dangerous. There is a reason most of the galaxy follows similar developmental paths. Outliers tend to cause problems. 2 weeks later, stood before the full Galactic Council. 53 species were represented in the chamber, beings of every shape and philosophy. He presented his findings with as much clarity as he could manage. The response was mixed. "Fascinating," said the representative from the collective, "a hive-mind species that valued stability above all else. But surely this is an anomaly. One species out of thousands. It proves nothing." "Perhaps they are simply lucky," offered the ambassador, whose people had survived 3 near extinctions through nothing but chance and favorable planetary conditions. "Or perhaps," said the delegation leader, "they are lying about their history. Many young species exaggerate their accomplishments." Had expected this skepticism. I considered all these possibilities. The evidence suggests otherwise. Their historical records are extensive and corroborated by archaeological evidence. Their own stories focus heavily on their disasters. They teach their children about them. They build monuments to remember them. "Why would any species want to remember catastrophes?" asked a council member from a species did not recognize. "We erase such memories. They serve no purpose but to cause pain." That said, is precisely what I want to understand. The council debated for hours. Some members wanted to dismiss the report entirely. Others wanted to quarantine Earth on the grounds that unpredictable species were dangerous to galactic stability. A few, were simply curious. Finally, the council reached a decision. Would be granted permission to establish a covert observation station in Earth's solar system. He would have 2 years to study human behavior and determine whether their pattern of catastrophe-driven growth was sustainable or if they were simply delaying an inevitable collapse. "But you will not make contact," the council chair said firmly. "We do not fully understand these humans yet. Until we do, we observe only." Agreed, though part of him wondered if observation alone would be enough. 3 months later, his research station was operational in the outer reaches of Earth's solar system, hidden behind a small moon. From there, he could monitor their communications, study their history in detail, and watch how they responded to ongoing challenges. The first thing he noticed was how much humans talked about their disasters. They had entire fields of study dedicated to them. History, they called it. They analyzed what went wrong, why it went wrong, and how to prevent it from happening again. They created systems and laws specifically designed to avoid repeating past mistakes. They had sayings about this. "Those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Never again, lest we forget." Most species try to forget their catastrophes. Humans seemed determined to remember every detail. The second thing he noticed was their art. They wrote stories about disasters, both real and imagined. They created films and music about survival against impossible odds. Their heroes were not those who avoided conflict, but those who overcame it. They celebrated struggle. The third thing, and perhaps most puzzling, was their innovation pattern. Pulled up technological advancement charts and overlaid them with disaster timelines. The correlation was undeniable. Their greatest leaps forward came not during times of peace and stability, but during or immediately after times of crisis. The atomic age had emerged from a world war. Their space program had been born from political tension between rival nations. Medical advances surged during plagues. Their communication networks had been built to survive conflicts. It was as if humans needed pressure to reach their full potential. Spent his nights reviewing the data, trying to understand. His own species had achieved stability and safety, but their technological progress had slowed to almost nothing over the past 1,000 years. They had perfected what they needed to survive comfortably, and that had been enough. Humans were never satisfied with enough. They always pushed further, and catastrophe seemed to be what pushed them hardest. As his first year of observation ended, prepared his interim report for the council. He still did not fully understand humans, but he was beginning to see the shape of something remarkable. These beings had turned catastrophe itself into a tool for growth. The question was whether the galaxy was ready to meet a species that did not fear disaster, but seemed to thrive because of it. Second year of observation began with a gift he had not expected. A global pandemic swept across Earth, and he watched in real time as humanity responded to an extinction-level threat. The virus spread quickly, killing millions in the first months, prepared to document another catastrophe for his research. According to council models, a pre-space age civilization facing a novel pathogen with this mortality rate had three likely outcomes: extinction, near extinction with technological regression, or fragmentation into isolated survivor groups. Humans chose none of these paths. Instead, they did something had never seen before. They shut down their entire global economy voluntarily. Billions of humans stayed in their homes for months. It was a level of coordinated sacrifice that most species could not achieve even with hive mind communication. At the same time, their scientists worked around the clock. They sequenced the virus's genetic code in days. They shared data across national boundaries instantly, even between nations that were technically enemies. They developed multiple vaccines in less than a year, a timeline that seemed impossible too. They had taken 50 years to develop a vaccine for their last major disease, and that was with a stable, controlled research environment. But the most interesting part was not the vaccine development. It was what came after. As the pandemic receded, humans did not simply return to their old ways. They had built entire new systems during the crisis. Telemedicine networks that allowed doctors to treat patients remotely. Remote work infrastructure that let billions of people do their jobs from home. Supply chain monitoring systems that prevented future shortages. Mental health support networks that had never existed before. They had taken a catastrophe and used it as an opportunity to rebuild better than before. Interviewed dozens of humans through intermediaries, using translation software and careful protocols to avoid revealing his presence. He posed as a human researcher from another country, conducting comparative studies. The humans never suspected they were talking to an alien. He spoke with historians, psychologists, disaster relief workers, and ordinary citizens. He asked them all the same basic question: why did humans keep pushing forward after disasters instead of simply surviving them? The answers varied but shared common themes. A historian told him, "We remember what happened so it won't happen again. Every mistake teaches us something. Every disaster shows us what we need to fix." A psychologist explained, "Humans are remarkably resilient. We have this ability to find meaning in suffering. We turn trauma into purpose. It's not healthy for individuals sometimes, but as a species, it drives us forward." A disaster relief worker said simply, "Because giving up is not an option. When everything falls apart, you either rebuild or you die. We choose to rebuild." But it was a conversation with an elderly woman in a war-torn region that finally made something click in its understanding. She had survived 3 wars, 2 famines, and the loss of most of her family. He asked her how she kept going. She smiled, a human expression that had learned meant many things depending on context. In this case, it seemed to mean both sadness and determination. "You don't understand," she said. "The hard times don't just hurt us. They show us what we're capable of. Before the wars, I was just a school teacher. Now I run a network that feeds 3,000 people. I learned I was stronger than I ever knew. Most humans never know their real strength until they have no choice but to use it." That night formulated his hypothesis. He called it adversity-triggered innovation syndrome, though he knew the name needed work. The theory was this: humans had evolved on a planet that was unusually hostile and unstable. Ice ages, megapredators, diseases, natural disasters. Their evolution had been shaped by constant threats, But instead of developing the approach of careful risk avoidance, humans had developed something different. They had evolved to see threats as challenges to overcome, not dangers to avoid. Their psychology was wired for it. When threatened, their stress response did not just prepare them to fight or flee, it sharpened their thinking. They called it being on edge or rising to the occasion. Their brains actually worked better under certain kinds of pressure. Their social structures reinforced this. Disasters temporarily overrode their tribal divisions. Humans who fought each other constantly would work together when facing a common threat. They had phrases for it. The human spirit, coming together in crisis, unity in adversity. And perhaps most importantly, they had built cultural memory systems specifically designed to learn from catastrophes. Written language, oral traditions, monuments, museums, history classes in schools. They did not just remember disasters, they analyzed them obsessively. Spent months testing his hypothesis against human behavior patterns. It held up remarkably well. He observed how they responded to economic crashes. When their financial systems collapsed in 2008, they did not simply rebuild the same system. They analyzed what went wrong, created new regulations, developed new technologies like blockchain and cryptocurrencies. Some of these innovations failed, but they kept trying different approaches. He studied their response to natural disasters. When hurricanes, earthquakes, or floods struck, they built back with better infrastructure, improved warning systems, and stronger buildings. Each disaster taught them how to handle the next one better. He examined their wars. After World War I, they created the League of Nations to prevent future conflicts. When that failed, they tried again with the United Nations. Neither system was perfect, but the intent was clear: learn from the catastrophe and build something to prevent it from happening again. The pattern was consistent across their entire history: catastrophe, analysis, innovation, rebuilding. Then the cycle would repeat with the next disaster, but each time they started from a higher baseline. Prepared his comprehensive report for the Council. He included hundreds of examples, detailed analysis, and his theoretical framework. His conclusion was stark. Humans did not just survive catastrophes. They psychologically required them to reach their full innovative potential. It was not that humans enjoyed suffering, far from it, but their entire civilization had been built on a foundation of overcoming threats. Remove the threats, and they invented new challenges for themselves. They climbed mountains because they were there. They went to space because it was hard. They split atoms just to see if they could. The Council received his report with what could only describe as horror. "These beings are unstable," the representative declared. "They actively seek out danger." "They cannot be trusted," said the ambassador. "A species that thrives on catastrophe will eventually cause one just to stimulate their growth." But his old supervisor asked the question that mattered: can they be stopped? Reviewed his data. Humans were approaching space-faring capability. Within a few generations, they would spread beyond their planet. Within a few more, they would likely encounter other Council species. "No," he said honestly, "I don't believe they can be stopped, and I'm not certain they should be." The Council erupted into debate. Some wanted to quarantine Earth's solar system to prevent humans from ever leaving. Others wanted to make contact and guide them toward more stable behavioral patterns. A few wanted to simply destroy them before they could become a threat. The debate was still raging when the alert came through. A cascading chain reaction of supernovae had been detected in a nearby sector. The stellar collapse was spreading like a disease, each dying star triggering others in a wave that was expanding toward both Council space and Earth region. The Council's top astrophysicists gave their estimate: 50 years before the radiation wave reached the Council's core worlds, perhaps 30 years before it reached Earth. The galaxy had just been handed a catastrophe that threatened everyone, and realized, with a mixture of dread and hope, that they were about to test his hypothesis about humanity under the worst possible conditions. The Council's emergency session lasted for 3 days. Representatives from all 53 member species gathered to hear the astrophysics report and discuss survival strategies. The news was grim. The cascading supernovae could not be stopped. The radiation wave would sterilize everything in its path. The Council's scientists had run every simulation, tested every theory, and consulted every archive from ancient civilizations. The conclusion was unanimous. Evacuation was the only option. The head of the Science Directorate, a being named whose species had mapped the stars for, presented the evacuation plan. They would consolidate resources from all Council worlds. They would build transport ships and establish colonies in safe sectors beyond the radiation wave's projected path. They would save as many people as possible. "How many?" asked the Council chair. Form dimmed, a sign of distress in her species. "With our current resources and the time available, we estimate we can successfully evacuate approximately 40% of the Council's total population." Silence filled the chamber. 40% meant 60% would die, billions upon billions of beings. "We must begin immediately," continued. "Every day we delay reduces our chances. We should prioritize evacuation of critical personnel, genetic diversity samples, and cultural archives." The Council members began discussing the details. Which worlds would be evacuated first? How would they choose who lived and who died? What resources could be spared for non-member species in the affected regions? Sat in the observers section, his mind racing. The approach to catastrophe was playing out exactly as expected: careful analysis, acceptance of losses, and methodical execution of the best available plan. It was logical. It was reasonable. It was also a death sentence for billions. He thought about the humans, about their history of refusing to accept the impossible, about their pattern of innovation under pressure, about the elderly woman who had told him that hard times showed people what they were capable of. He requested permission to speak. The Council chair acknowledged him with surprise. Observers rarely spoke in emergency sessions. "I have a proposal," said. "We should contact the humans." The chamber erupted in objections. "They are not even a spacefaring species," someone shouted. "They have no relevant expertise," another said. "This is not the time for scientific curiosity," the representative said coldly. "We are facing extinction." Waited for the noise to die down. "With respect, that is exactly why we should contact them. Humans specialize in facing extinction. They have done it repeatedly throughout their history, and they have never simply accepted their fate." "Because they are irrational," said gently. "I read your report. I understand your fascination with these beings, but irrationality will not save us from physics." "Perhaps not," agreed. "But neither will rationality alone. We have the best scientists in the galaxy, and they tell us 40% survival is the best we can do." The humans would hear that number and consider it a starting point, not a conclusion. The Science Directorate head spoke up. "I actually reviewed this report on the humans with interest. Their pattern of catastrophe response is unique. However, they lack the technological base to contribute meaningfully to this problem. They have barely left their own moon. They developed vaccines for a novel pandemic in less than 1 year," countered. "They split the atom before they had computers. They went from first flight to landing on their moon in 66 years. They do not let technological limitations stop them from attempting the impossible." The Council chair raised an appendage for silence. "Even if we were to contact them, what could they offer? We have science beyond their understanding and resources they cannot imagine. What would be gained?" Had thought about this question during the entire emergency session. They would offer a different perspective. Every species on this council evolved to avoid catastrophe through careful planning. The humans evolved to overcome catastrophe through adaptive innovation. We think in terms of what we can save. They think in terms of what they refuse to lose. That is just a difference in attitude, someone objected. No, said firmly. It is a difference in approach. Our models tell us what is possible within known parameters. Humans excel at expanding the parameters. They turn impossible into not yet achieved. The debate continued for hours. Some council members were intrigued by the idea. Most were skeptical or outright opposed. The humans were too young, too inexperienced, too unpredictable. Finally, the council chair called for a vote. The motion was to grant permission to contact the humans and share the details of the crisis, with no promise of resources or support. The vote was close, but it passed. Felt a mix of relief and terror. He had just convinced the Galactic Council to contact a species they barely understood during the greatest crisis in recorded history, based on his theory that humans thrived under pressure. If he was wrong, he would be responsible for wasting precious time and resources. If he was right, he might be responsible for saving the galaxy. 2 days later, transmitted his first official message to Earth. He kept it simple and direct, knowing that humans would be shocked by contact with alien intelligence. The response came faster than he expected. The humans were excited, frightened, and eager to learn more. He explained the situation, the cascading supernovae, the radiation wave, the time limit, the evacuation plan. He offered them a place in the evacuation, priority transport for a portion of their population. It was more than the Council usually offered to non-member species, but felt they deserved the chance. The human response stunned him. "Give us the data," they said, "we'll fix it." Tried to explain that the Council's best scientists had already determined it could not be fixed. The humans were unmoved. "We've heard that before," they said. Against the Council's explicit recommendations, shared the complete astrophysics data with a team of human scientists. Within days, they had organized a massive collaborative effort. Universities, governments, private companies, all working together on the problem. They sent 12 proposals in the first month. He forwarded them to and the Science Directorate. The response was dismissive. Artificial wormhole networks, theoretically impossible with current technology, said. Quantum-scale stellar engineering. We would need equipment that does not exist. Weaponized black holes. That is not even science, it is fantasy. Relayed this to the humans. They sent back a message. Which one is least impossible? Over the next year, something remarkable happened. The humans did not have the resources to build any of their proposed solutions. They did not have the technology. They did not have the time. They built anyway. Nations that had been enemies for generations pooled their resources. Billionaires donated their fortunes. Citizens volunteered for projects they did not understand, simply because they were told humanity needed them. The entire species mobilized like had seen them do during their wars, except this time they were fighting physics itself. They failed more often than they succeeded. Prototypes exploded. Theories proved incorrect. Entire approaches had to be abandoned, but they kept trying. 18 months into the crisis, a joint team of human and scientists achieved a breakthrough. There were a council species known for theoretical physics, and they had been quietly working with the human team despite official council disapproval. They had combined 3 of the human proposals into a hybrid approach. None of the individual theories worked, but together they created something new, a stellar dampening field that could reduce the energy output of a dying star before it triggered a cascade reaction. The mathematics worked. The physics held up under testing. It should not have been possible with current technology, but the humans had developed 17 new technologies just to make the components needed. They built a prototype and tested it on a smaller stellar event in an uninhabited system. It worked, not perfectly, but it worked. brought the results to the council. The chamber was silent as reviewed the data. "This is extraordinary," she said finally. "It should not work, but it does." The council had a choice to make. They could continue with the evacuation plan that would save 40% of their populations, or they could divert resources to building a network of these dampening stations, with no guarantee it would work on the scale needed. The debate was fierce. The approach said to stick with the known plan. The human approach said to try for a better solution. In the end, the council voted to support the human effort. They would continue evacuation preparations as a backup, but they would also build the dampening network. It was the first time in council history they had chosen to fight a catastrophe rather than simply endure it. The next 8 years were chaos. Humans and council species worked together in ways neither had imagined. The humans pushed constantly beyond safety margins, taking risks that made the council members nervous. The council provided resources and manufacturing capacity that the humans could never have achieved alone. Ships were built, stations were constructed, the dampening network grew across the sector like a web. And then the radiation wave arrived. Watched from a monitoring station as the first edge of the cascade reached the network. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the dampening fields activated, and the screens showed energy readings dropping, stabilizing, spreading. It was working. Not perfectly. 3 stations failed under the load. 2 sectors were lost when the network could not respond fast enough. The wave broke through in several places and had to be contained by secondary measures. But the cascade was slowing. The chain reaction was breaking. The radiation wave was being dampened to survivable levels. When it was over, the council scientists ran their analysis. Instead of losing 60% of their populations, they had saved 95%. Billions of lives that would have been lost were preserved. The galaxy would have to rebuild its infrastructure in the affected sectors, but the new systems were more robust, more interconnected than before. The crisis had forced them to work together, to innovate beyond their comfortable limitations. Stood before the council one final time, preparing his last report on the human question. "The humans did not save us because they were smarter than we are," he said. "Many of our species have superior intellect. They did not save us because they had better resources or technology. We had those in abundance. They saved us because they refused to accept that billions had to die. Where we saw an inevitable catastrophe, they saw a problem to solve. Where we calculated acceptable losses, they asked how to avoid all losses. Where we prepared to endure, they chose to fight." He paused, looking around the chamber at the representatives of 53 species who had nearly been wiped out. For millions of years, the Council has tried to prevent catastrophes through careful planning and risk avoidance. Humans spent mere thousands of years learning to exploit catastrophes as opportunities for growth. We spent our energy avoiding disaster. They spent theirs becoming stronger because of disaster. The question before this council is not whether humans are safe to have in the galaxy. They are not safe. They are unpredictable, they take excessive risks, and they will cause problems. But the question we must answer is this: can we afford not to have them? Can we afford to face the next galaxy-wide threat without the species that sees impossible odds as a challenge rather than a defeat? The vote on Earth's admission to the Galactic Council was not unanimous. Some species still feared human unpredictability. Others worried about their aggressive approach to problem-solving. But the vote passed. 3 months later, humanity officially joined the Galactic Council, not as junior members to be guided, but as full partners with equal voice. Attended the ceremony. He watched as the human representatives stood before the council chamber for the first time, their faces showing excitement and determination in equal measure. The council chair welcomed them formally, then added something unexpected. You have shown us that catastrophe need not be the end of civilizations. It can be their transformation. You have taught us that sometimes the greatest danger is not in taking risks, but in refusing to take them. Later at a reception, a human diplomat approached. She was young by human standards, bright-eyed and curious. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for believing in us when your people had every reason not to." Made a gesture of acknowledgement. "I simply observed what was already there. Your species did the rest." "Can I ask you something?" the human said. "In your report to the council, you said we exploit catastrophes for growth. Do you think that's sustainable? Can any civilization grow that way forever?" It was a good question. Had thought about it often during his research. "I don't know," he admitted. "Your approach has served you well so far, but you have always had catastrophes to push you forward. What happens when you achieve true peace and stability? Will you continue to innovate without external pressure?" The human smiled. "We've been asking ourselves the same question for centuries. Maybe that's why we keep creating new challenges. We climb mountains, explore space, push the boundaries of science. We're looking for the next thing to overcome." "That sounds exhausting," said. "It is," the human agreed. "But it's also who we are. We're a species that looks at the universe and asks what if, instead of why. We're never satisfied with the way things are. We always believe they could be better." Watched her walk away to join the other human delegates. Around the reception hall, humans were already engaging with council members from a dozen species, asking questions, proposing collaborations, discussing ideas. They had been part of the council for less than a day, and they were already pushing boundaries. That night wrote his final entry in his research log on humanity. He had spent years studying them, trying to understand what made them different from every other species in the galaxy. His conclusion was simple. Humans had learned something that most civilizations never discovered. Catastrophe was not the opposite of progress. Sometimes it was the catalyst for it. The galaxy had spent millions of years trying to achieve stability and avoid disaster. Humans had spent thousands of years learning to turn disaster into opportunity. Both approaches had value, but neither was complete alone. Perhaps thought that was the real lesson. The galaxy needed both the careful wisdom of species like thee and the bold audacity of species like humanity. One to avoid catastrophes when possible, and one to overcome them when avoidance failed. Together, they might just survive whatever the universe threw at them next. And knowing humans, they would probably be excited about the challenge.